So now that we completed iteration 1 and iteration 2 and we can display a list of contacts in the table view controller, let's take a look at adding a new contact or iteration number 3. Again, we follow the steps. We'll get a new page here. So this will be the beginning of iteration number 3. And we start with the step number 1, problem formulation. And in the problem formulation, we define the scope. And the scope here is that the user selects to add a new contact. The app displays a view or a screen to add a new contact. The user can cancel and go back or save the contact, and the contact then will be added to the list. How are we going to test this? User adds the following contact and it is displayed to the list. So we can say that, so we have a John Doe, we can maybe use mine, first name, last name, and the email. Alright, so that will become our test case. So in iteration 2, we define the solution. So how are we going to accomplish this? And following the model view controller, we start with the model. We already have the contact model. We already have the, because we're going to need a contact. So we already have that, and we already have the list of contacts. So there are no really new data concepts in here. The user will enter first name, last name as a string, but that will be handled in the view and the controller. But for data to model, no additional models needed. So we move on to the view. So the view, so we have the list here and the user first name and last name in here. So from the list view, we need to have a mechanism for the user to move to another view to add a new contact. So we can add a button to add to a new contact and use a segue to move from the contact list screen to the new contact screen. Once you are in the new contact screen, we need to allow the user, give the user the opportunity to enter the information. So the user will need a way to enter a first name as a string, a last name as a string, and an email address. And we have learned in project number 3 that we can use text field to enter a string. So the user can do that. Then once the user does this, the user has two options. They can cancel. Maybe they changed their mind. And if they cancel, they just go back to the list, or they can save. And if they save, they also go back to the list. But when they go back to the list, they save the information in the contact. So in the list, the information is saved to the list and need to be reflected. So from a view perspective, we're gonna add another screen which means we need to add the navigation controller. We've used it multiple times now. So we have the navigation controller and connected the navigation controller to the list and have a button, a bar button item or a menu bar item in the list to segue to the new contact. And what is new here is that we're not going to use a back button. So we will have our own or introduce in this project what is known as the exit segue. And the exit segue, or in other words, the unwind segue, is a segue that returns you back, unwinds the segue that brought you here, and you can come back. And we'll learn how we can add that segue and with two different functionalities. So we actually have two of them to go from cancel or save and go back to the previous list. So that takes us to the controller. And the controller will have multiple things. First, the contact list to controller. We're not going to do anything when we go from the list to the new contact. But in the new contact, we will need to set up the outlet for each text field, which will then, the outlet would represent by itself an attribute that we can access. Then to set up the segue, we will need to add two functions, two action functions in the contact list controller. We will need to set up a cancel function and this need to be an interface builder action, and we need to add a save function. The cancel function will dismiss the view controller, and the save will retrieve a reference to the save will use the segue to connect both controllers and save a new controller, a new contact. And we'll see how we're going to do that. So that's basically the biggest piece. We have the new contact, which we know how to do. Add 3 text fields, cancel, save, go back, which is new. And the go back, we're going to add a cancel function for an IB action. And we'll see how we're going to add that in a minute in the implementation. And the function we're going to do is to dismiss the view. And we're going to learn about this function from the table view or from the table view controller. So that then takes us to the last step, which is the solution implementation. And in that step, step number 1 is to add the navigation controller. Then step number 2, add a new contact view. And we have two options. We can add it as a regular view like we have used before, or we can add it as a table view. And I will use the table view to show you how we can use a table view in situation where we know exactly how many cells we want. And then in step number 3, to connect the two views. Then in step number 4, add the cancel segue, add the cancel function, and then connect the cancel button to it. And then in step number 5, we add the save function and connect the save button to it. I know that you don't really know exactly or unable to envision what goes in each one of them, but you will do research. Like if you were doing this on your own, you will do research on the areas you do not know, and you will find either guidance from the Apple developer website or from the community or from me. And I encourage you a lot to ask me whenever you feel you have a question. So you ask me, and I'll provide help for you in the class or outside. So add the save function and connect the save button. And inside the save function, we will need to retrieve the information, then create a contact, add the contact to the data source, which remind me I forgot something in the controller. We're gonna need to add another function to the data source. So if I go back here to the controller, in addition to the controller dealing with the new contact, I'm gonna need another function in the data source. I'm gonna need a function to add a contact. So we'll need to implement that function, add the contact to the data source, and then refresh the table view to reflect the new contact that we just added. So let's go ahead and start implementing. Oops, I'm moving further away. Trying to get to the beginning of the implementation. Here it is. So to add the navigation controller, let's go back to Xcode. We go to the storyboard. So we have one view controller here. So we select the table view controller, go to editor, embed in navigation controller, and that will embed that table view controller in a navigation controller and add the navigation bar that we have here. So we add, this was added, I was playing with it. So we have the navigation bar, and then we search in the object library to add a bar button item to add so that we can launch the new controller. So bar button item, and add it to the navigation bar. And when you select that, and we've done this before in some of the other projects, in the identifier there are some existing identifier, which is basically what goes on the button. So we can say add, since this one adds a new item, and use this. This give you more standardized format for some of the basic functions. So here is the add. Let's make some room. The next step is to add, so we added the navigation controller. The next step is to add a new contact view. And we can use a view controller like we have done before, or we can use a table view controller and use static cells. So I'm going to use the table view controller since we haven't done it before, and I want to show you the difference between the dynamic prototype and the static cell. So bring in a table view controller to the storyboard and connect it to our contact list. So select the bar button item, control, drag so that we can connect it. Ask you for the type of Segway. The show Segway is easier and give you a back button. In this case, I don't really want a back button because there's no really back. I'm either gonna cancel or save, so there's an action either way. So I'm gonna choose the present modally. So the present modally connects the two of them, and it does not add a navigation bar to the table view controller. So here is the new table view controller, and if you select the table view, you see the content, and we talked about dynamic prototype and static cells. Dynamic prototype is when the items in the cell changes when the app is working, like the list. But the static cell is when you know exactly what's going to happen. So in this case, I'm adding a new contact. So I know there's a first name, a last name, and email. So I'm only needing 3 cells. So I can select static cells in this case. When you choose a static cell, you can put them in more than one section. Here I only have one section. The style, you can leave it plain like this, or you can group it. So I'm gonna group the cells, and you can choose to have a separator. So I'm gonna add a single line separator, and you can color that line. So I'm gonna add a blue color to kind of showcase that separator. You cannot, I can select the section. We can't really select the section. Well, we can. If you click lower below the cell, you can select the section. And the section allow you to enter a header. So header, we can say enter new contact. And it has a footer where you can say save or cancel, like give some information, and it will display here. So this is just to tell you that there is a section, and if you have more than one section, then there will be another one that comes below the section. Then we need to, right now there's no way to go back to the address, to the list, so we can add a navigation bar. Scroll down till we find it. So we can add a navigation bar to our contact here. Maybe because I use this. So let me take that out. And here it is. So because I used it, so the header, so and I can use the title that comes with the navigation bar to say this is new contact. And now that I have a navigation bar, I can add a bar button item. So I need to add two of them. So I add one to the right, and I can use the save identifier and add one to the left, and I can use the cancel identifier for that. So here is our new contact, but this has 3 cells, but each cell has only the contact view. It doesn't really have anything in it. The purpose of this cell is for the user to enter information, so we need a text field. So grab a text field and add a text field to each one of the 3 cells. And in the placeholder, give a message to the user, enter first name, and then add another one. And we'll say enter last name. You can change the colors and the font size and change any of the other properties of the text fields as you have done in previous projects. So here we have the text field. The next step is to connect this cancel and save button to exit Segway or the Unwind Segway. In order to do this, we need to have the functions that the cancel and save will connect to already implemented. When the cancel and save, I need to go back to the address book. So the address book will be the right place, or the controller will be the right place to take responsibility of handling the exit from the new contact controller. So I'll go to the address book controller and add the cancel function and the save function. I'll add the address cancel first to show you, then we'll add the save. So before, in an open area outside the other functions, let's add a cancel function to handle the cancel button on the new contact controller. We haven't added that controller yet, but we'll add it because we need it to connect the outlets. So this function will use the same thing, so function cancel, but it has to have 2 specific items. First, it's an action function. So we add the at IB action for interface builder action. You have seen this before when we made the connection between a button and a controller, and we chose a connection for an action for that connection. Here we're doing it manually. So the first thing for the function is to have the IB action, and the second is to have one parameter for the Segway. So the parameter can have any name, but we commonly call it Segway, but it has to have the type UI storyboard Segway. And that will be our function. In this function, we can do one thing, dismiss the controller. So we'll say self, which refers to the address book table view controller, and we use a function called dismiss view controller animated. It asks you true or false whether you want it animated or not. So we'll say true and press escape to get from that to the actual true. And then upon completion, you can specify a function to act upon completion of the dismissal in case you needed to do something. In our case, we don't want to do anything, so we choose null. So you can see here we added an action function, but it's not connected to anything. So back to the storyboard. From the cancel button, if you select the cancel button, and then we can connect it to the exit, now you see the action segue, you see the cancel function. Before we add that cancel function, you will not see anything. So I can click on cancel, which basically is saying that I'm connecting this button to an unwind segue. And if you right click on the segue, you see it here. There is a segue that's connecting to the cancel function as an action segue. But where can we see that segue? You can see it in the content sheet. So if I open the content outliner, you see here the unwind segue to the exit scene. And if I bring in my utility area, you can see the attributes of that unwind segue, and we can give it a name. So we can call this the cancel segue. It is a good practice for each segue to give it an identifier. It's difficult to find it from here, but we can open the content outliner and find the unwind segue, and then from the attribute inspector give it a name. So that's the cancel segue. We can try that. Let's run this and test it. So you can open, here brings you a new one, click cancel, it takes it away and bring you to the other one. Now what we need to implement is that the user can add the information here and then save. We can see it. Here we need to add the controller and so on to be able to make the connections in there. So here is the cancel segue. I will stop here, and then in the follow-up video, because this one has become too long now, we'll add the new controller for the new contact controller, connect the text fields as outlets, and activate the save or the save to with a save segue function.